Hello everybody and welcome to another episode of my game dev diary for my roguelike project. Made a fair bit of progress since the last video. As you can see now, the pots and crates, and I suppose they look a little bit like cups, are in the dungeon, and it's randomly generated depending on which room you're in. So you can go into a room and then it'll spawn the items that should be there. You can kill the items in the room at the minute, so that'll be for drops. So maybe it'll drop coins or health pickups or items, and then you can go back out of the room and then back in, and you can see that it remembers that those items have been killed and that they shouldn't be there. So that took a fair bit of work to get working, a fair bit of coding to get working. I'd say maybe an hour and a half since the last video. It took a while to get the animation to work. So those are all the same actor, all the items, the crates there, they're all the same actor type. So it's just the animation has changed. So if I look, is there a crate behavior or something like that? I'm sure there is. Arrow movement, barrel behavior. So that code I will go through in a while. It took a while to construct because that's the code for erasing the barrel from the list so that you know it's dead once a slash hits it. And this is the code for the animation, so I'll go over this now. Remember the stairs to dungeon code, which was generating the actual zeros and ones for the random dungeon generator. So that populates all the dungeon lists with zeros and ones to come up with the dungeon. So you've seen that before. Once that's complete, and then do after 0.1 seconds, trigger event, do it in behavior S2D2, and this is because we need this to happen first before we do the S2D2 behavior, because this allows us to know what the dungeon looks like and what rooms are dungeon, or what rooms are available in the randomly populated dungeon. So this has to execute before the S2D2 behavior, and in Stencil you're not guaranteed, depending on different behaviors for an actor, because this is attached to the stairs, and so is S2D2 is also attached to the stairs. So you're not guaranteed that which order the behaviors activate in. So to make sure that they do it in S2D2 happens after the dungeon has been populated. That's why it's in this do after 0.1 seconds. So it's kind of like a negligible time, a tenth of a second. You'll not really notice it, but it means that we definitely know that S2D2 behavior will be activated once the dungeon has been populated. So if we go to S2D2, this is probably new to you, I think, or maybe it was, the majority of it was in the last video, but I'll go over it because I've been asked to go into a bit more depth into the random item generation, so I'll go through it here. So this is the do it event in S2D2 that we were talking about at the bottom here. So this is the event that is triggered by this bit of code. So S2D2, we start off with dungeon list 1, so set active list to active DR list to dungeon list 1, and then repeat 5 times because there should be 5 items in dungeon list 1, either zeros or ones, but there'll be 5 numbers in dungeon list 1. And it says get item current loop count from the active dungeon list. So this is basically asking, is the room in the dungeon list, is it a 1 or a 0? If it's 0, then it doesn't do anything, it just skips until the next loop count. It just does absolutely nothing. But if it is equal to 1, that means it is a room in our random dungeon. So if it is equal to 1, what we want to do is then populate it with some of these barrels. So set random number to a random number between 1 and 5. These this is going to be the random amount of barrels in the room, so it's going to create between 1 and 5 barrels, and then repeat a random number of times. So within this bit of code, it's creating the barrel and it's saving it to a list. So it's saving it to a list called active room. So it's a new list that you haven't seen before. It's called active room, and the first number is going to be the item number. So the first number in active room will be the item number, which is the current loop count. So it'll be start off as 0, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, because it's repeating 5 times. And it starts off as 0 because the current loop count starts as 0. It doesn't start as 1. The first time through the loop, the number is 0. And then this is the type of create that we want. And in the barrel behavior, we have 12 animations, all from A1 to A12, and according to what number this here is, so 1 to 12 corresponds to which animation it shows in the barrel behavior. And then what we want to do is set a random X coordinate for it to be spawned at, so it's between 49, 431, and a random Y coordinate to be spawned at between 49 and 270. But we want to make sure, and I'll just show you now what the next bit of code does, is we want to make sure that the barrel can't spawn right in front of the player. So when the player is spawned, you can see these below the door. We don't want the barrel to be able to take up that space or the space in front of any of the doors. So the next bit of code ensures that the barrel, if it is meant to be right in front of the door, that it's moved. And it appears that the barrels aren't quite, if they are overlapping like here, that they're not moving, which I'm going to have to correct. I'm not sure how, but I will have to correct somehow. But at the minute, I think that's why they're overlapping, is because this was probably in front of this door and we don't want that, so it's been moved, but unfortunately it's been moved in front of another barrel. So if we look at what the bit of code that makes sure that it's not in front of the door is, it says if R and X is greater than 200 and R and X is less than 270, that means that the X coordinate is in front of the north or south doors. So then we want to check if the X coordinate is in front of the north or south doors. We want to check to make sure that the Y isn't either in front of below the north door or above the south door. So this one asks, is the Y coordinate greater than 223? And if it is, it means that the crate or the barrel that's been created is going to spawn in front of the south door, which we don't want. So it's going to spawn, if it's in here, if this is true, then it's going to spawn above the south door, which we don't want. So we say then set the X coordinate to 190. So that will move it away from the door. Otherwise, if the RY is less than 80, that means that it's going to spawn below the north door, which we don't want to do. So we move it again to 190. And if it can then spawn, these triggers here mean it's only if it's in the proximity of the door. It can spawn in front of the north or south doors, but only sufficiently far enough away in Y from the north and south doors. And then we do the same for the east and west doors, but this time it checks to see if it's going to spawn in front of the east or west door, which is why it checks in Y. And if it does, then it checks if it's going to spawn right in front of it in the X term, and if it does, then it moves it. And once that's been sorted out, then it says add R and X to the active room, which is the list, and then add R and Y to the active room, which is the list, which then we say copy active room list to room 1, room 2, room 3, depending on what loop count it is. So then we know we have a list full of 1 to 5 items with their item type, item number, item type, X coordinate, and then Y coordinate. I'm going to do that for the first 5 rooms, and then we empty the active room at the end. Just make sure that none of the contents of the active room go into the next loop. Then we do it for the second dungeon list, exactly the same process. The only thing is then it's for rooms 6 to 10, and we do it for dungeon list 3, exactly the same process. And then from rooms 11 to 15, 4 is for rooms 16 to 20, and 5 is for rooms 21 to 25. So hopefully that 10 minutes of me waffling on has helped explain the creating of lists for the items, the barrels at the minute, as we've called them. So we have then lists called from room 1 to room 25. We'll have lists populated when there is a room in the dungeon that you can't get into. We'll have a list populated with an item. So then we go to a scene behavior, which is attached to the dungeon 1 scene. So it's attached to the dungeon 1, and it's the item spawner. So according to which we have dungeon player position, which I think we've seen before, and all it is 2 numbers telling us which room in the dungeon the player is in. So get item 0 from dungeon player position, I think that is which column the player is in. So it'll be from room 1 to 5. So that's basically dungeon list 1, and then then it gets the second item in the player position list, and that tells us which in the first this bit of code tells us in the first column which room it's in. So it tells us which room to set the active room according to the dungeon player position. So that's basically just a bit of code running through the dungeon player position to figure out which room we're in. So once we know which room we're in, then we can say, well, we want to spawn the barrels. So number of items in active room, which is number of items in the list. So we divide the number of items in the active room list by 4 because we have 4 numbers per item. So if we look at S2D2, remember we have the item number, the item type, and then the X and Y coordinate. So we then divide that by 4, and then that'll figure out how many items it has to be spawned, and we set counter to the current loop as number times by 4, because that'll give us which part of the list to look at. It's like a flag to say, well, for the first item we want to look at counter as number +1, because that'll tell us if it's less than 12, we know it is going to be a barrel, because the numbers 1 to 12 are going to correspond to barrels. We're going to put in spikes, which I'll probably do in the next video, because I've talked for 14 minutes almost now, so I'll get on to showing you how to create spikes in our dungeon using code very similar to this, but it means that it won't be 12. Spikes will be at the minute will be 13 and 14. So if it's less than 12, then we know it's a barrel it has to create, and then we know to create a barrel, so it's create barrel at X, and then we know that it was the third part of the list, so that's why it's counter as number. So what we have counter, and we know what part of the list to look at because we've times it by 4. Plus 2 will get us the third part of the list, and then the Y is the fourth part of the list, so that's why we have +3, and then we set the item type number to, and we get the second item in the active room list, so that'll tell us which number it is between 1 and 12, and then for last created actor, set the animation type to that item type number for the barrel behavior. So this will set this animation type, so we have an always loop to see if the animation switch has happened, and if it hasn't happened, then we're asking if animation type is greater than 1. So the animation type starts off at 0, and as soon as that bit of code is sent what animation type number it should have, then it'll say any switch hasn't happened, and then it'll actually have the actual number, the animation type. I'll set any switch to true, so it won't do this bit of code again, and that'll switch the animation to what type of barrel it should look like. So I think I showed before in a previous video that all the barrels and what they look like. So here you can see all the animation types, so it'll set it to one of those. So that's what that bit does, tells us which item it looks like. And then we need to know the item number, so when the player breaks the barrel, breaks it open, we know which one to remove from this room list. So if we're in room 1, we want to remove that barrel that's been killed from the room 1 list, so we need an item number. So it says set item number for that last created actor to the item number, which is the counter's number plus 0, and then it just loops through this the amount of times it needs to, as how many items there are in the active room list, and it'll create the right amount of barrels. So took me quite a while. I think maybe 2 hours in total to code this up. Probably half of it was spent writing the code, maybe a bit less, and then the majority definitely was ironing out the bugs, because it just wasn't working as easily as I thought it would. And then the barrel behavior, what we do, I'll run through this quite quickly. I realized I covered quite a lot in this video, so if you want a bit more info on any of the behaviors, please just ask in the comments, and I'll do my best to either explain in another video, or I also have a blog, so I can talk about it maybe in a bit more depth in the blog with another video, separate from this Project Roguelike series, if you would like a bit more information. But what this does is says if the barrel has been hit, it's just a check to make sure that it can only be hit once. This if bit here, if /hit, so it's just the normal check you do to make sure that it's only been hit once. Then we repeat, that's the same bit of code it was in the item spawner down at the bottom, this here. So this loop, so it loops through the whole list again and set counter, so it's the same loop basically, but rather than spawning, what we're doing is we're checking to see is the counter number the same as item number TK. So remember, when we spawn the item, we give it an item number, and if the item number that's been hit, if the barrel has been hit, item number is the same as it is going through the list, then what we do then is replace the item number with the text is dead. The +1 of the counter would be then the item type with dead, counter 2, so that'll be the X position, dead with dead, and then the Y position with dead. So basically the 4 parts of the list that correspond to this item that's just been hit by the slash, you overwrite them with dead, and then you repeat 4 times, because it'll remove dead 1 time from the list. Each time this bit of code is executed, it removes dead as text, so it'll remove all these deads, and then all you do then is copy the active room. Where do you set active room? Oh, this bit of code when created tells us which room we're in again, so I think we've seen that before. I talked about it in this video. All we're doing is letting us know what room of the dungeon we're in, and then this bit of code says, well, we know what dungeon room we're in again, so set the room list to the active room. So what we've done is active room then has the bit of code corresponding to this item removed, so then we want to update the game attribute variable with the active room, because that'll remove this item. So that's how you get the item to be killed and removed from the list. I realize I kind of ran over that quite quickly, but the code, it's sort of similar to what we've seen before, except that we're overriding the items with dead and then removing the dead text, so that will remove that item. So I realized that this video, actually I haven't done too much coding live. I've been talking about what I've done, but I think it's important that people can sort of see the bits of code that I've done in 20 minutes rather than sitting through 2 hours of me struggling with bugs. So yeah, you can start to see that you can kill these barrels and that they stay dead once they've been killed. So next video, what I'm going to do is then add in spikes, I think, so make it a bit more dangerous. So it randomly generates spikes the same sort of way that we create these barrels, and with the spikes they'll hurt you. So then once we've done that, we can move on to spawning the monsters in, and then once they're in, we can look at having a goal for the dungeon, so either trying to recover an item or hit a couple of switches. So as always, if you have any suggestions, please leave them in the comments. Until next time, see ya.